when it comes to COVID-19, after months of doing nothing other than predicting the virus would disappear, or maybe if you drank bleach, you may be okay, Trump has simply given up. He's waved the white flag. He's walked away. And his failures come with a terrible human cost and deep economic toll.
Joe Biden yesterday criticizing President Trump's response to the coronavirus crisis. According to a new ABC News Ipsos poll out just this morning, only 33% now of Americans approve of President Trump's handling of the pandemic. He's down 8 points on that figure since June. 67% of Americans disapprove. That number is up 9 points. Among Republicans, President Trump's approval of handling the crisis has dipped to 78%, down from 90% in mid-June. And only 26% of independents approve of the way he's handling this crisis. That's a 14-point drop just since last month. As for President Trump's handling of race relations, 32% of Americans say they approve, 67% of Americans say they disapprove. Joining us now, three veterans of winning presidential campaigns. Jim Messina served as White House Deputy Chief of Staff to President Obama and ran his 2012 re-election campaign. He's now the CEO of the Messina Group. Cornell Belcher served on the polling team for both of President Obama's presidential campaigns. He's now president of Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies and an MSNBC political analyst. And Mark McKinnon served as the chief media advisor for both of President George W. Bush's campaigns. He's now co-host of The Circus on Showtime and a contributor to Vanity Fair. It's a great group, guys. Welcome to all three of you. Mark McKinnon, you have the best hat, so I'm going to start with you. You've written a piece for Vanity Fair. You have the only hat, in fairness. You've got a piece in Vanity Fair about a return to decency, which is a theme you all ran on with George W. Bush in 2000, coming out of the Clinton years. Restore decency. That seems to be a lot of the subtext of what Joe Biden is doing.
Well, it is, Willie, and the thing that I'm struck by is that there are a lot of parallels between his message now and George Bush's in 2000. The interesting thing is that the only life raft that Donald Trump is hanging on to right now is the perception that he's better to handle the economy. And now that may go south before this election's over, but right now he's also hanging on to the conventional wisdom that often, historically, presidential elections are decided by the economy. In 1992, James Carville famously said, "It's the economy, stupid." And it has been traditionally and conventionally, but that was the case in 2000 when we ran. People felt very good about the economy, so we had to have a different kind of message. And we discovered that people were worried about the cultural drift. They were worried about Bill Clinton's irresponsibility and extending that to a broader personal responsibility or irresponsibility in the culture, directly tied to Monica Lewinsky and what happened there. So we had a message about restoring honor and dignity to the White House, and I made ads that had that message over and over and over again. It's the most dominant message that we expressed then. And recently, when Joe Biden won the primaries, he said, "We're closer to restoring decency and dignity and honor to the White House." And I heard that and I said, man, you're right on message, because I think in this current environment, there are a lot of other things that people care about. Certainly they care about the economy. And by the way, his speech yesterday was very strong. And if he checkmates Trump on the economy, it's game over.
So, Cornell, you live in data. You certainly lived in data on both of President Obama's campaigns. You understood the voters, where they were, who you had to get. So as you look at publicly available polling right now, national polls are interesting. That's, of course, not how we vote. But if you look particularly in swing state polling, with Joe Biden leading, as of now, again, it's only July 10th, leading in places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that Donald Trump obviously needs to hold on to. If you're on Joe Biden's campaign, how are you feeling this morning?
I'm optimistic, but nervous at the same time. And I want to pick up on what my friend just talked about, the economy is stupid. I think the mantra going into this election is it's racism stupid. And when you look at how both COVID but also racism is overrunning the conventional issues right now, landscape, and as the polling data you just showed, the president is way underwater on dealing with COVID, and he's way underwater on dealing with racism. And even in the public polling, you see a majority of voters saying that racism is a major voting issue right now. And internal battleground polling that we have, you got 78% of white college voters prefer a candidate who's more focused on race and discrimination, and 50% much more likely among white college voters, and that sort of candidate who's more focused on racism beats the candidate of law and order by 30 points among white college voters. So you see a trend line happening here, both in voters' awareness of racism, and for the first time you have a majority of white voters who actually see the racism and understand that racism is a major issue. I think we've had the year of the woman. I think we've had the year of sort of soccer mom voter. I think 2020 might be the year of the George Floyd voter, as voters are voting on racism and rejecting Donald Trump and a lot of Republicans around him.
Cornel, I know you're a good campaign strategist, because the minute a campaign gets a lead, your reaction is to get nervous, and that's probably the right reaction. Jim Messina, where do you see the race right now? What do you make of Joe Biden's message yesterday of Buy American? We were talking earlier in the show about the attempt by the Trump campaign to paint Joe Biden as a leftist in league with some of the members of Congress that President Trump likes to talk about. That's just not a label that sticks based on his record for 40 years or what he's talking about today.
Yeah, it's true, Willie. And I think yesterday is going to be known as a very big moment in this campaign. Democrats are exultant today because the economy is the only thing holding Donald Trump up in this election. And Joe Biden went right at that sweet spot yesterday, and he did it in the perfect Joe Biden way, a blue-collar mantra. Somewhere out there, Joe Scarborough is celebrating because he's been saying this for a while. Joe Biden had to go straight to this economic message in a middle-class, blue-collar way about reconstructing our economy in a way that makes sense. And I thought it was a very deft move. I thought it's exactly what he needs to do. And then you look at some of these numbers that Cornel and Mark were talking about, with only a quarter of independent voters approving of the president's numbers on COVID. Race relation numbers are historically bad for the president. The economy is the only thing holding him up here. And I think if you start to look at the other number that I really thought was profound this morning, Willie, was his number starting to crack amongst Republicans. Because you've heard me say this before. Yeah. When you run a presidential campaign, one of the numbers you care the most about is enthusiasm. Are your voters more enthusiastic than your opponents? And this has been an absolute sea change in 6 months between the two campaigns. Now it's Democrats who are incredibly enthusiastic. You saw that with Joe Biden's $141 million number of finance last month. You saw it in the Senate races with Democrats raising unbelievable amounts of money. And then you now see the president's base beginning to erode in these battleground states. A quarter of Republicans now disapproving of the president on COVID, on race relations in the 6 battleground states that are going to matter.
So, Mark, we've talked about for several weeks now and months, actually, how the president's out of step where the country is on, as Cornel pointed out, on these questions about race and racial justice, also on where the country is on coronavirus, saying things are fine, it's going to go away. That's not the reality in people's lives. Instead, he focuses on the preservation of American heritage. He's talked about the Confederate flag, criticizing earlier this week NASCAR for taking it down at their events and saying their ratings are down because of it. That's not true. But it turns out the country is not focused. Dave Wasserman has a tweet here that we've put up. Polling he's seen in swing states, they're not worried about Confederate statues or Biden's mental acuity or Trump's taxes that we've been talking about this morning. They're worried about coronavirus. They're worried about race relations, and they're worried about their jobs.
Well, that's the bigger problem for Donald Trump, which is his instinct, because this is the way he ran in 2016, is to go backwards. His whole message about making America great again is sending a coded message to people to say, so much is happening in the society that's bad for you. We have others coming across the border, taking your jobs. You're losing your paycheck. Industry has left. So Donald Trump doesn't know how to communicate a forward-looking message, a progressive message that deals with issues like COVID, with dealing with issues like race, because that's all about the future. Donald Trump only knows how to talk about the past. And that's why you see him returning to form on Confederate statues and race and all these other issues, Willie.
Cornel, it's Susan Del Percio. Question on how this messaging is starting to get baked in. We're at the point in a campaign where, you typically try and brand the other person. It seems that Donald Trump, by mishandling COVID so badly, has branded himself as incompetent. And I wonder how much is his numbers now are going to be baked into what we see in November, that it's hard, that they're so solid that he can't dig himself out of it.
Well, that's part of the problem, as the two veterans that are also on the show know. It's hard to turn around a negative. Once a negative lands on you, and that was part of the problem with Hillary. Her numbers were it was just tough. I mean, her unfavorable was upside down in the same way that Donald Trump was. So it's hard to turn a negative around. To a certain extent, people ask me, so why is he doubling down on the division? Why is he doubling down on sort of these racial issues? He's got nothing else. I mean, he can't become Bill Clinton. It's not all of a sudden he's going to be the candidate who's compassionate and feels your pain. And let's also be clear about something. If you go back to 2016 and look at the data there, it wasn't like voters thought that Donald Trump was the most competent person. It wasn't like they thought he had the right temperament to be president. His other than doubling down on racial resentment, this is not someone who has a lot of other cards to play. So I'm not surprised that he's doubling down on it, because he has to hold on to his base. If you think things are eroding right now, you let him stop being the tribal strongman for those voters right now who feel angst about the changes in this country. If they move away from him also, he's done.
Jim Messina, I want to come to you. We're up against the top of the hour, so we're going to force you to come back next week to expand our conversation. Jim, Cornell, Mark McKinnon, Susan Del Percio, great insights from people who have run these big campaigns and won. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you all for watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you right back here with Joe and Mika next week. Stephanie Ruhle picks up the coverage right now.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.